We've had Greenland, we've had Venezuela, but could the Trump administration now set its sights on Cuba? Because reports suggest the administration is pushing for regime change in Cuba by the end of the year. So officials say the White House has been encouraged by its removal of Venezuela's leader Nicholas Maduro and now views the Cuban government as fragile, with its economy close to collapse. Whilst it's understood that there are no concrete plans for Cuba, January's operation in Caracas is being seen as both a blueprint and a warning. And goodness me, I can see why they're probably buoyed by other regime change, bearing in mind the swift and efficient capture of Maduro. I still think, by the way, when it came to Maduro, it's widely known, did call President Trump, or at least they spoke on the phone early December and said, look, let me leave with $200 million of my own money. Let me leave with it, and I'll leave voluntarily. You know, you can do what you want, but I need to be immune from prosecution. I think that Venezuela operation was so swift, and this isn't to discredit the US Special Forces, by the way, but I think it was so swift and so easy that the conspiracy theorist in me thinks there was some sort of deal there where Maduro said, okay, I'll make it look like you've captured me, great operation, but I'm allowed to leave as well. He is, of course, in the Southern District of New York in the court on drug trafficking charges, but we'll see what happens with that. Right, with regards to Cuba, I digress. Joining me is Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America at the Heritage Foundation, Andreas Martinez Fernandez. Nice to see you. What's your take on Cuba? Just explain, please, for our British viewers who particularly aren't in the loop, including me actually, about why they would want regime change and maybe what else is in Cuba that is of interest to the White House.
Yeah, well, the reality is Cuba is in many ways the malign force that has not only been behind and backing Venezuela, but also many of the most dangerous threats emanating from our hemisphere against the United States. It has been a long-standing adversary and really has weaponized not only its own territory, but its people against the United States. It's sent high-level spies to infiltrate the United States, and it has, again, propped up actors like Nicholas Maduro and other anti-American groups. Beyond that, we've also seen Cuba allow China and Russia to offer to have a operating base there. We actually have a very explicit Chinese intelligence base, which was established in Cuba a few years ago. So this is a regime which is openly hostile to the United States and takes substantial actions towards achieving those ends of destabilizing the United States.
How much of this is just getting rid of a commie, of a Marxist administration like we saw with Maduro? This, you know, you ask any Cubans in, say, Miami, in southern Florida, and they'll all vote Republican, or most of them would. Of course, a massive Hispanic wave propelled Trump to victory down there in 2024 because they know what communism's like. How much of this is just getting rid of the commies and the Marxists?
Well, you know, I think that this is really about getting rid of the threats to the United States and U.S. national security. And the fact that those often are communists and Marxists, I think, says more about that ideology than it does anything else about the United States motives. The reality is, as I said, Cuba is making itself actively a threat to the United States through its housing of Chinese intelligence and dual-use capabilities and its weaponization of its presence throughout our hemisphere. Venezuela being one of the key examples. Again, something that your viewers should know, when we had this raid against Venezuela and to capture Nicolas Maduro, it was Cubans that we were actually fighting. There were 32 Cubans that were killed in the operation to capture Nicolas Maduro. That should say a lot about the role that they were playing in Venezuela as essentially the force propping up this malign regime and this malign actor, Nicolas Maduro. And it's not limited to Venezuela and Caracas, although I'm sure they're still very much engaged there and trying to undermine what the United States is doing. But throughout our hemisphere, they have long played a malign force and role.
What could we see in terms of American intervention? Would it be similar to maybe Venezuela? Would you see sort of Navy SEALs fast roping down from Black Hawks and getting rid of the commies? I mean, what does it look like?
I think that there are a lot of different options on the table that include potential less use of kinetic force. This is a regime which is, even compared to Venezuela, really decrepit and on its last legs in a lot of ways. In that way, it's different substantially than Venezuela, in that there isn't a massive social unrest risk or the presence of these criminal groups like the ELN or others, other armed groups that are a threat to kind of broader stability post the regime's collapse. I think the prospects for a stability in Cuba when you remove much more wholesale that regime are much better because of the broader absence of those kinds of actors. It's going to be difficult to see removing a single person as being the single tipping point for Cuba, although it could. But I think that what we could see again is just this pressure which the United States keeps up as far as preventing Venezuela from smuggling oil and other resources that are stolen from the Venezuelan people and offering that to Cuba, as they have for years, and leveraging other tools of pressure from outside, and potentially supporting a forces or actors within Cuba that want to see a restoration of freedom in that country and on that island. I think there are a lot of outcomes and paths that this could take. But either way, or regardless of the manner, I think the Cuban regime is definitely counting its last days, and I think a lot of people in Cuba and in Havana are starting to recognize that.
All right, great stuff. Andreas, thank you very much. That's Andreas Martinez Fernandez, the Latin America policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. My panel were back with me in DC still, the Washington bureau chief at The Guardian, David Smith, and senior border security and immigration specialist, Simon Hankinson. David, do you think the administration here are going to be buoyed by their swift and efficient capture of Maduro, or kidnap, as some people like to call it? What do you call it? What's your stance on Venezuela?
Yeah, I'd say abduction is one word, or certainly capture is another, and is a sort of decapitation of the regime rather than regime change. And I certainly think it emboldened Donald Trump to take these other actions regarding Greenland and others.
Have you heard about Cuba? Or word on the street? What's your kind
Sure. I think Secretary of State Marco Rubio is the son of Cuban immigrants. This has been a long-term project for him, so he'll be whispering in Trump's ear about that. Again, you question what does the average Trump voter think about all this? They're very concerned about domestic issues, bringing down prices. And it's extraordinary in the last few months how Donald Trump has become a foreign policy president. In that, it's in common with other presidents in their second terms. They find foreign policy so much easier to make a big difference, whereas the domestic situation gets very messy. Trump is not the kind of guy to spend days fiddling with pieces of legislation. He loves these big spectacular wins overseas. But with regard to Cuba, I think one worry I would have is that as they lose access to Venezuelan oil, the economy could be hurt there. Will there be some kind of humanitarian crisis? Is the Trump administration really willing to see people starve in the hope that they will rise up and overthrow the Cuban regime?
Yeah, Simon, and I guess for the administration, they need to communicate why, let's use Venezuela as an example. Why is this good for the everyday American? Well, beyond other things, if you believe them, the drugs will stop, you'll save 300,000 lives. Also, your gas prices might go down because we'll have access to all the oil that Venezuela swiped back in the 70s and more recently from US oil companies. So they've got a task on their hands, haven't they, the White House, in communicating these kind of interventions to the domestic American. Why should the everyday American care about Cuba?
Well, look, the revolution was what, 1959, when Trump was 12? And we tried regime change. It was called the Bay of Pigs, April 1961. It did not go well. And for that reason, I think most American presidents have shied well away from actually trying to overthrow the Cuban regime. like I said before, Trump sometimes does the new thing that no one else has tried. But I think it would be a hard sell. I think Cuba would be a fairly tough nut. Of course, it could be done militarily. But as you say, what's the reason? Why is it different now from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago? We had the Mariel boat lift where Castro dumped hundreds of thousands of criminals onto the beaches of Florida. That's happened at least twice now. And they've been a thorn in our side. They've spied against us. Many murderers and terrorists from the United States have sought refuge in Cuba. So are things that much worse now? Hard to say.